Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to an episode of Minds Emotions. We're going to have a very special conversation today with a very special individual who has been very kind to share her time and going to be able to share her story. It was a very serious story, and we're going to be talking about some of the effects that regular, real people deal with when it comes to autism, when it comes to mental health, and I believe it's going to be really insightful and educational for a lot of people to be able to learn kind of a true story of what happens behind the scenes, to kind of allow us to be able to move forward and potentially learn from these things and improve how we treat each other and how we also prepare things for people that need that help. So without further ado, would you please introduce yourself to the people?
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Theo. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you so much for inviting me, because it really is something that is so close to my heart, as you know. So I'm a mum of two autistic young people. My older son, Stephen, became at the age 14 became quite difficult to live. We didn't have any support, as is the case of so many families in United Kingdom or around the world, indeed.
Yeah.
And at the age of 14, he was in a special school in my area in Islington, and for one whole year, well, almost 2 years actually, he was going in at 9:30 and was put in a sensory room, locked in a sensory room for almost 2 years, until 3 o'clock in the afternoon when he was leaving to leave for home. And that's when it became very difficult, because he then would come home, being severely autistic, and he has self-injuries behavior, so he self-harm very badly.
Okay.
But he also can harm you, in a sense that he will hit you if you try to stop him hitting himself or hurting himself. His self-injuries behavior is mostly with his head. And one day, usually the worst times for us as a family and him was the school holidays. Any time of school holidays, especially in the summer because it's longer, that's when he became more volatile, for one of the better words. And one day, I live near the new Arsenal Stadium, and it was a game, and he wanted to go out. If he doesn't go out, then he gets very anxious, because he's bored. So he ended up breaking everything in the house or hitting me, you know. So one day he insisted he wanted to go out, so I took him. He's semi-verbal. At the time, he was actually less verbal than he is today. And we started walking to Finsbury Park, but there was a lot of people, and he became very anxious with all the comings and goings. Yes.
Yeah.
And suddenly he turns around to me and hits me, and he actually knocks me to the ground. And when I'm on the floor, he actually hitting me at all sorts of he was smacking, punching, kicking. And I actually had loads of black eyes, and I had broken ribs at the time, and it was just shocking, but mainly
come to terms of that. And
yes, the understanding of that, and you know. And that was actually the first time that he actually attacked me in that sense. He had hit me, he had butted me, you know, when he was trying to bang his head so severely. I would hold on to him, you know, it was the only way, or put him in a shower with cool water to help him calm down. But being in public, there's not much I can do because of the environment we are in, or we were in. And And so at this point, I said, I need help. He's nearly 16, and he was quite a big chap. Me, I'm only a little person. And I couldn't help him anymore because his strength is double of what I have. And so I decided to go to my local authority, but no help. So I ended up going to legal. Which brings me back to a subject we spoke about of a recent TV drama that we just where on Holby City, where a nurse Madge has a 17-year-old daughter with severe autism, and she sounds very much like my son. And she's a nurse, she's a professional. And you know what? Sometimes people think because you're a professional, when you have a profession, you tend to get the help, but actually that doesn't help like that. It actually is the opposite. Unless you're a millionaire, that you can afford to get your child help, care, support care, then that's it. Like on her case, so she didn't have any support and she couldn't afford to pay, because that's what her local authority says. The moment they say to me, myself, they wouldn't help me because I worked, my ex-husband worked. Therefore, if you're a working couple,
you have enough,
then you are responsible. Even a nurse's salary is not that high, so therefore she cannot afford to pay for a person, And on this case, on the show, it showed how she was attacked by her daughter. But here's the thing that I so disagree: the fundamentals of how they created that episode. They used the word domestic violence. Now, I want to clarify to the people that are listening, to your listeners right now, that it's not called domestic violence. To me, it was the same way when people saw me with black eyes or any physical damage that I had on my body. Yes, people assumed my ex-husband was beating me up, and my boss included many times said, I'm going to call the police if you don't do anything about it. Now, and that's exactly what happened on Holby City, and I just thought to myself, this is a great way of showing what's happening. However, they should have been clearer, or the BBC should have been more clearer at the end of the show, stating this is not domestic violence, this is help that this family needs in order to help their child with severe autism or learning disability. It's to do with learning disability and autism that they become very anxious and they hit out. They never mean, there's no way my son, when he hit me, he meant to hit me that way. In fact, when he put me on the floor, and it was after he calmed down, and thanks to a member of the public that helped, who actually, by the way, by the grace of God, because I was scared that this man was going to attack my son, but he actually knew about autism, and he immediately realized that my son was autistic. And that's
another fear as well.
That's another thing, because my son doesn't look autistic, as so many people say, but he doesn't look disabled, because he's normal looking. So people assume that he's being naughty, or he's being, that he's a really bad young person. It's the opposite. He's definitely, he doesn't have a mean bone on his body. It's just a way he's showing how to communicate. The only way he can communicate is by hitting out. And so it's not domestic violence. I cannot be clearer on that. I took it very personally that I'm being called, that when my son hits me or pulls my hair, because he has done so many times, chunks of my hair being pulled, black eyes, as I said, and only 2 years ago he broke 4 of my ribs.
So it's a lot, yeah.
Yes, but is he a violent person? No, he's not. Which brings me back to when we talk about mental health and how it's perceived, the autism, that severe side of autism is perceived by the public, but mainly by professionals like social services, NHS. I'm very grateful to NHS, there's no question about, for what they have put my son and how they are now helping my son. But I cannot emphasize how imperative it is for parents and schools. Let's also be frank here.
Yeah.
Our autistic children start in school. They have other people in their lives aside from the parents. They have school, and unfortunately, schools do let down our children immensely. Not just social services. The fact that they cannot work together, schools with social services and health, is a big issue for our children, because they know they're having that this child in school is in crisis, but they send a child home without knowing that we don't have any support. And therefore, because they know their children, not just parents, the only people that actually knows our children is school and parents. Therefore, those two groups of people should come together before it becomes what became to my son. So my son then, I didn't have that support, and I decided, okay, you won't help me. My local authority told me they won't help me, and they didn't have any concerns how I and my ex-husband dealt with my child, because they could see, they had the reports from school saying that my son went to school every day with still wet hair, showered every day, very well cleaned, very well put together. Therefore, there was no concerns to help me, because they knew we were amazing parents. Well, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of amazing parents out there, but they all need help. Yeah. We all need help. We can't do it alone, especially when there is that crisis.
Yeah.
And so at this point, I decided to seek legal advice, because I could no longer take full care of my son and working. I work between 12 and 14 hours a day. The kind of work that I didn't give me that flexibility of taking time off. My employer didn't understand. He understood that I had a child with special needs, but he didn't understand the need that I needed to be home at certain times or whatnot. They don't care about that. They know I'm employing you to do a job, and you do it, regardless of going on at home. But I also knew that I could, even though I was working, I couldn't afford to pay for somebody to look after my son.
Yeah.
So we coped together. So I worked days, my ex-husband worked nights. So he would look after my son during the day, even though he should be asleep,
Yeah, exactly.
And then I would at night, and my son did not sleep. He was not a sleeper. So most days he would sleep 5 minutes,
Wow.
which meant I slept 5 minutes, and then I would go to work the early hours in the morning, and it was exhausting. I was exhausted, and after that incident with my son, I had a breakdown. I felt that being Latina that I am, I always believe that it's my responsibility looking after my children. You know, our cultures,
important.
our cultures were so similar to yours and all. You know, we are very family oriented, and we believe that it's our duty to look after our old and our, you know, vulnerable.
That's right.
But saying that, back home, most of the moms don't work.
Yeah, so there's a little bit more, more time
Yes.
to be able to be spent at home
Exactly.
with the family.
Exactly. So, and so it was really difficult. And to be fair, I had 2 other children, you know, so it was really difficult. And through the legal system, having to get a legal solicitor, I found a residential school for Stephen to go.
Okay.
He went to a residential school in Norfolk. For the first few months, at least, he went in December, just before his 16th birthday. And by March, he had done really well. And I was told by the teacher that it was such a shame that the school that he had been in London did not push for his education, because she found him to be super intelligent. And she said he not only is great with music, but he's also great with maths. Did you know that? I said, and I didn't know, you know. And she said, such a shame. So she said, we are pushing for him to do these 2 things because it's something that he really enjoys and is happy in class. Well, and she said, I think we will push for him to do better, and you know, and he will do well. Well, as things goes, it didn't turn out so well after all. By mid-March, I received a phone call. Actually, before that, at this stage, the school, the owner of the school decided to sell up and sold the school to a bigger company. Now, this company comes in with new ideas, and as often happens, and all the great work that they had done with my son went down the low, because they started changing things. Even the team that my son had, and they were specifically told to keep to the same team, because routine is absolutely important when you have a child with autism.
That is something I definitely do know. Routine is imperative.
Imperative, absolutely. And so, but the school decided, these new people decided to change that, because they noticed how brilliant 2 of the support workers that my son had were with people with such behavior that challenges, like my son, and they had other children in the school with fundamental and deep behaviors. And so they decided that these 2 people, he was an amazing person in particular. He was actually a psychologist, trained, and he was working in the UK as a support worker because he couldn't do his job. He was from Poland, and an amazing young man. I mean, amazing. And I'm always going to be grateful to him, and always will remember him. Even my own son, Stephen, remembers him, talks about him. And he was moved to, and when Stephen saw that happening, one by one of his favorite people were being taken and replaced with agency staff, and he became volatile.
Yeah.
You would.
Because you're changing the people, you're changing the environment, the routine.
Yeah, and that routine. At which point this happened, this agency staff were put in place instead of his normal, and yet my local authority was paying for those 3 specific people. Stephen was on a 3-to-1. For those who don't understand what that means, is 3-to-1 means 3 people looking the one is my son, and the three are the three support workers.
Yeah.
And then we found ourselves with non-experienced agency staff. Some of the staff didn't speak English, which made it, if they actually spoke Portuguese or Spanish, because my son is bilingual, or trilingual, because he speaks Spanish, Portuguese, and English, that would have been okay. And that's not to say that a person who can't speak English cannot work with somebody. They can. But if he's already he's non-communicative, he's non-verbal, so having somebody who doesn't speak a language, then it turns out to be more difficult. So he got frustrated because he was trying to communicate and nobody understood him. And became quite volatile. And one night, many nights really, was discovered that they were tying my son to a bed with rope and making my son sleep through the night, staying in his bed, tied with his arms and legs to the bed. And he had been clean since he was a tiny little boy because he hated the nappy. So we potty trained him from very young, and he never had any accident. And then suddenly he's opening his bowels and urinating in a bed, and that because
he can't go anywhere.
He can't go anywhere. And one then person came in one day and found my son tied to a bed. He did the whistle blowing, thank goodness, but it turns out that this had been happening for weeks.
Period of time.
Yes. So after this incident, I think my son was kind of retaliating about every time he went to bed, they put him to bed, he probably felt, oh, they're going to tie me up again. So he was very much moving around the house. He would not go to bed. And what happened at this point is that it hasn't been very clear what happened really, but the morning staff came in and saw a big bump on the side of his head, and this bump turned to a big disc. His head actually sunk in, and his face, he couldn't open his mouth. He had a hematoma. And I got there on a weekend, and I hadn't done anything about it. And I got there to visit. I would go every weekend, from Friday till Sunday, and my son, his eyes were sunk in. I mean, honestly, it was the most horrendous thing. So anyway, I immediately take him to emergency room, and it ends up that he has a brain injury. And he ends up having 6 operations on his brain. The 6th time, between that, he lost the three first times that they drill, they use a drill, and he lost 6 pints of blood, and he was losing the blood as much as it goes. He was having a blood transfusion. He was losing it at the same time as he was going in, and at this point, the hospital, when they saw what was happening, they didn't have a neurosurgeon in place. They had to fly a neurosurgeon from London, from St Thomas Hospital, via helicopter to take him to Norfolk to operate on my son. After the 5th attempt, and he was still, he was bleeding heavily, and they couldn't stop
control,
the surgeon came to us, was about 4 o'clock in the morning, and told me, I see that you're Latino, so I guess you're Catholics. I would suggest there's a chapel in the building that they're Catholic, and I suggest you go there. If you believe, go there and pray, because I have to drill deeper. And there may be a possibility that we either lose your son on a table, or if we don't, he may end up being brain damaged. And God, he was just horrible. And he said, so we won't know until he, if he does survive the operation, we don't know the damage until he wakes up. And we have to induce him, coma-induce him for a few days, because we can't let him wake up straight away. So it was all 5 days that he was in an induced coma, and I stayed with him by his bed through the whole time. And finally I fell asleep, and mid-afternoon I was holding onto his hand, and suddenly I felt a pressure on my hand. And he says, "Mommy, I want to go home." And that was the most amazing thing to hear that my son was actually
amazing.
survived. And then for him to survive that, sorry, I always become so emotional. For him to survive that, and then what happens? The school decides to give notice. They didn't want him anymore because they wanted more money. So Islington was already paying £250,000 for his placement, and they wanted almost 400,000. And they wanted 5 to 1, 5 people to look after my son. So my local authority said, what do you mean? Give us a breakdown of what that money is for, and then we can negotiate. But they refused to give breakdowns. Then I realized they weren't taking my son to school anymore. So at 16, no longer, he didn't have any more school. And they were paying for school and the residential, and yet they weren't taking him. It was 5 people holding my son in a lounge. My son was sitting like we are, right here. You sit in the middle, and there was one person on each side of him, one holding his legs and 2 holding shoulders and head, 24/7. So my son had no life. He was being a virtual prisoner in this place. At which point we were complaining because they were getting paid for all this amount of money, and they weren't looking after my son. They only sitting there, Yes. And so they give notice, and there was nowhere else for him to go. My immediate thought was, now I'm bringing him home. And by the grace of God, I should have done that. But I listened to the social worker. And let me tell you, I have met quite a few in my life, in 27 years of my son's life. I have met quite a few social workers. There's not one of them that I hate so much as I hate this person. And hate is a strong word, and I'm not one of those people that actually, I'm a very forgiving person, but I can't find myself in my heart, to forgive this person because she lied to me. And I have hatred for this person, or I don't know, resentment even. She lied to me, and my son ends up, she phones me one day, knowing very well what was happening, that it's weekend. And usually this sort of situation happens on a weekend, because then you have no choice.
Exactly.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Friday evening, 5 p.m., she calls me. It was actually, I remember as if it was yesterday. 10 minutes past 5, she calls me to tell me that this is what's happening, and my son is going to St. Andrew's Hospital in Northampton, a mental institution. My first thoughts were, what do you mean a mental health unit, she said. My son is not mental. My son is not mentally ill. And she said, oh, it's just a terminology they use. And I said, how do you mean? And she said, but listen, it's just that the name that they use for the hospital, but he's going to an autism unit. Well, my son, I found out that wasn't the case. 6 months later, after my son had been in this horrible, horrible place on earth, my son had been there for 6 months when I found out he was actually, I knew, I mean, the moment I visit, I wasn't allowed to visit my son before 8 weeks. Again, they lied to me. 8 weeks, he's supposed to be home already. But that's another lie that she didn't, she lied. When she explained, again, mental health, under the Mental Health Act, I didn't know what that meant. I thought, I had known about the under the mental health, Section 3. I always thought that meant for people who have psychosis. You know, never for somebody like my son.
Autism,
Yes. And I thought, how? There's no way in heaven would I would done anything to stop that happening if they didn't lie to me. Because if they had explained to me what that meant, but they lied because they knew what kind of a person I am, you know. They know I'm not going to be quiet, you know. And so she says, oh, but Leo, please don't worry. It really is just for an assessment. The psychiatrist is going to assess him, and he's going in for 28 days. And then after that, he's discharged. Well, what people don't know, and that this is very important, it's imperative that parents out there that's going through, because let's face it, I am very sure that there are quite a lot of people, parents, going through this situation as we speak. If you find yourself in a situation where you are in crisis point and your social worker is suggesting a mental institution, well, they call it an ATU. So the ATU stands for Assessment Treatment Unit. Now, the wording is already saying treatment. Now, you can't treat autism. You know, no. So it's not as if I had a psychosis episode, then that would be treatment. But a person who was born with autism will live with autism, will die with autism. You can't cure autism, and that's the frustration of what happened to my son and my friends' sons and daughters. It was just shocking. And so at those 20, and then I was told by the hospital, no, that's not quite how it is. Once your son comes in on Section 2, and at 28 days, then he goes into Section 3. And I said, but she, you know, and they said, no, we never do that unless we know that that person does not need to be here. And I said, so you were saying to me that my son then belongs here? Yes, they said. And I said, but explain to me, why does my son belong here? Because of his self-harm injuries, and what happened to his head is considered to be a mental health. And I said, well, okay. So I took it in because I didn't know any better. Yeah, I didn't know what that meant.
Yeah, you just thought that potentially it could help.
Yes. I mean, and they actually, and I'm going to tell you something that I have always said and used, is that they, in my view, at that time, they sold me, they were a second-hand car salesman, selling me a car, say, oh, this is a BMW, but actually, when you look at it, it's a Fiat. You know? Yeah. And so for me, that was what was happening. They sold it to me. And I only learned it too late of what was happening. Yeah. So 6 months later, after my son was there, I knew that this is no place for my son. Yeah. So, and it started when I first visit. And at first visit, it's one clanking doors, clank, 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 clank. You know, it's a prison. For one of the better words, it's a prison. Doesn't have the metal bars, but that's beside the point. It's still
You can't go where you want to go.
No, and the staff all carrying huge bunch of keys, to enter and closing doors, and you barely have between one door and the other. You barely have space to maneuver. And we got to St Andrews, and we were taken upstairs on the fourth floor, I think it was, and with all these clanking doors. Every floor there was doors, so you couldn't actually go freely up to the top. And when we got to the top, there was this sort of, at the top of the landing of the staircase, there's a door, you go in, but there is no space really. So you have a tiny little entryway where you kind of, I had to actually, back to back, in order to be able to let the woman or man or whatever it was, one of the carers, to open the door. But meanwhile, I had to be patted down, because you can't take anything in. If you had a coat, even if you were freezing cold and you had nothing under, you had to leave it in there. And there was this glass window where there was a lounge behind that glass. And my son was coming through the other end, and he passed. When he was passing for me they wouldn't let me into the area until my son was brought in first. And as he passes through that glass, first of all, there was these 5 men in there, on their 40s, 50s, maybe 60s even, some of them. As I looked at them, the hairs on the back of my neck, and I had this huge, when you feel something, your body goes...
Shudder.
Yes, and it felt...
A bad feeling.
I had this huge bad feeling, and I thought to myself, those men, who are they? Why is my 17 and a half, my nearly 18-year-old son in that area with those weird men? They give me the creeps. It really, I felt it's weird. And as I say then, my son, my knees buckled. And my ex-husband held me up because I fainted. The way there was 3 people holding my son. He was so drugged. And as we then went, they said, okay, now we can open the door. As I went towards, and they were still coming through, and my son looks at me, and he says, Belly, I had to put my ear to his, in order for me to hear. He said, Mommy, take me home, And I am going to hug him, and he flops, and I go down because he couldn't hold his body. Now, in 2 months, he had lost maybe 2.5 stone. He was so drugged up. You ever seen films in America from early 80s when there was people in psychiatric hospitals? Do you see how they were wearing those white
jackets?
Yes. And it was just shocking. I couldn't believe it. How could they treat my autistic son that way? It was so inhumane, and it was just so... it was horrible.
As a parent as well.
Yeah, and he was smelly. And guess what he says to me? The first thing he says to me after he says he wants to go home, he says, Mommy, shower, wash, stay. And he really smelled. Now, it took 6 months for them to wash my son. Now, guess how much they were being paid to take care of my son a week?
How much?
Almost £14,000 a week. £13,800 a week. Now, not even personal care. 6 months I said, I can't leave my son here anymore. And my son begging me every weekend, I'll arrive, begging me to wash him. I got there one day and weekend. Before I went into Sainsbury's in town. I got a big bottle of, those water bottles, the huge big bottles. I got a big bottle of water. I got toiletries. I already had clothes in the car. And I went to the canteen and I got hot water, which I had to pay for that hot water. A joke. And I had towels and I had a sheet. And I said to my ex-husband, let's go. We're going to stay outside. Even if the guys say no, we are taking him outside. And I couldn't take him in the bathroom. I wasn't allowed. So the only way to wash my son was to take him outside. So I washed my son under a tree. This was about October. It was quite cold. And I washed my son under a tree. But when I started undressing my son, and my ex-husband holding him up with the two staff, which actually, they were lovely people. And his underwear was stuck to him. And I ended up going to my makeup bag, bringing shavers and scissors and to clean my son. When he was washed, and he was, I was heartbroken because I was giving my son a shower, a bath, under a tree. Yeah. Under a tree, but he was shivering so badly. But the happiness in my son was amazing to see, because he had a wash. Now this was a young man who always had a shower in the morning and a bath in the evening. That was the routine he had every single day. Yeah. Then I said to the young person, actually the same age as my son, who was a carer, was taking a PhD in autism. Lovely person. And he says to me, I said to him, why are you guys not giving him a personal care? Why are you not washing him? Yeah. And he said, we're not allowed. I said, what do you mean? And he said, because do you notice the people that are on his ward? I said, yes. They're weird people. They give me the creeps every time I come in, and I don't see any signs of autism. And I said, and by now I'm an expert in autism, and I'm quite sure they don't have a learning disability, much less autism. And they said, well, they don't. And I said, why do I have this bad feeling every time I see them? Obviously, he couldn't tell me, because obviously...
Can't communicate like that.
No, not me and Stephen. I meant the staff.
Oh, the staff, of course.
Yeah, the staff, due to data protection and...
Yeah, they're not allowed to...
Yeah, and even their jobs.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I said to them, to this person, I said, okay, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to ask you 5 questions at you. Mm-hmm. You don't answer. You either move your head for no or yes. Mm-hmm. And I said, is that ward an autism ward? Mm-hmm. Are they specialists in autism? No. Mm-hmm. I said, okay. Is there an autism unit? He said, yes, but we do, but it's only for up to 16-year-olds. So I said, okay, I know you can't answer this question about those people, but let me ask you a question. Those people, those men that are in there with my son, are they violent people? Yes. At which point I said, and this young man said to me, Leo, I love your son. He's such a lovely young person. When he smiles, when he's happy, he's so lovely to see. And we're same age. I have a twin brother who has learning disabilities and autism. And if being the same age, my twin was in this place, I would die. And they said, I suggest you fight to take your son out of here as soon as possible. And that's exactly what I did the next day. I came home, and together with a friend who helped me set up the change.org campaign. His name he is an autistic man himself, Kevin Healy. He's an amazing campaigner. And he helped me set up the petition. Within days of setting up the petition, we had 30,000 people. And including Rio Ferdinand.
Oh,
wow. And he helped get more signatures.
Oh, that's
God
amazing.
bless. I don't think it would be wonderful if he's listening.
Oh, it would be, yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
Rio, if you're
he does.
listening, I want to say a personal thank you, because with that made a huge difference, because and I quote, he saw my petition on Twitter.
Yeah.
He then asked all his followers and fans to sign the petition. And he says this is the scandal of the century.
Yeah.
And he said this is a national scandal, which afterwards I stolen his slogan, the scandal, because I thought, gosh, yes,
People need to hear about
it really is a scandal, And with that became I then started getting calls from the various journalists who wanted to talk to me about it. But also, within days of my petition going live, I got about 2,000 emails from families across the country telling me their stories about their own children. And including a family whose son was over 20 years in an institution. Then I got another one that their family member had been at St. Andrews for over 40 years. It was shocking. It really was shocking, because coming from a Portuguese background, I had never heard even the most severely autistic, disabled, dare I say it, were ever put in places, because in those days they were called asylums, And I remember those asylums. We had an asylum back home, but it was for people with severely mental disturbances, not for somebody like my son or somebody on a wheelchair, But you find them there. And then I got involved with MenCap and the Challenging Behavior Foundation. I know there are a lot of families out there that have contacted both organizations and haven't had any help, and I understand that. But to me, they were my salvation. I cannot thank enough Dan Scora. I have to name him because I can tell you that he probably saved my life. And then my dear friend, who is an advocate, Mrs. Jane Knight, who actually does housing for people with learning disabilities and autism.
Oh, that's amazing.
She is an amazing dear friend, and I thank those two people because they saved my life. Because when my son, knowing what my son was going through, and he stayed at St. Andrews for 2 years, even after the campaign, even after going on TV, going on dispatches on Channel 4, was something. Then the hospital themselves then started threatening me with gagging orders.
Oh, wow. Okay.
There's another issue with gagging orders. These private healthcare organizations, St. Andrews is a British one, but there are various others that are American. The majority are American, charging this exuberant amounts of money, which essentially making our children cash cows. for them, and abusing our children, and abusing the system, and abusing their human rights. At which point, I also, talking of human rights, I did this campaign called Stripped of Human Rights, because I felt that my son was being stripped of his rights, as was I. One of the things about being under the Mental Health Act in those institutions is that parents have no rights whatsoever. So you are essentially stripped of the rights to your child. And so I felt very much stripped of those rights. My child didn't have a family right. That means is a human right. A person with, no matter what needs the person have, they have a right to a human right, to family life, to live in the community. Now, talking of the community, when they are in those institutions, and Stephen was there at St. Andrews for 2 years, and then because my local authority didn't have nowhere for him to go, there was no housing and there was no community placement, and he had a house. This is what I don't get. See, he lived in my house for 16 years almost, until he went to the residential school. That means he had a family and he had a house, he had a home. But once he went into these institutions, he became homeless essentially. So local authorities in general don't like bringing our children back to our family home. And it's been a fight for me to get my son home. I believe quite strongly, and they know this, that if a person with learning disabilities or autism have capacity, meaning they have mental capacity to make decisions for themselves, if that's what they wish, to live on their own, then absolutely they should. There's no question about that. A person with learning disabilities or autism have a right to a life, if that's however they want to live that life. But for those who lack capacity, like my son, and we have to make decisions for him, then I have a right as a mother to make that decision. I have a right, in my view, is that my son is mine. I gave birth to him. I carried my son for 9 months. Therefore, he's my child, he's my boy. And not having that capacity to decide what he wants, then I should have that be able to make that decision. But unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. So, my local authority, and in general, by the health of any health system, is saying no, because they're an adult, therefore.
So they're trying to treat them like they're.
Yes, and I understand. My friend Jane says to me, but I have this ideal. Probably I'm a bit of an idealistic, but I say, well, if my son doesn't have capacity, and he lacks capacity, and his mental age is probably about 7, therefore, if your normal child, which that is not to say that my son is not normal, but a mainstream child who doesn't have any special needs is 7 years old and he wants to go and live on his own, you're not going to allow your child of 7 years old living by himself. So in my mind, maybe it's a Latina thing, maybe it's my culture, I don't know. But then again, cultures should be respected as well. Do you know what I mean? And so I feel that there's that lack of understanding when it comes to cultural issues and religious issues
and differences
in regards to our special needs people. So I feel that it's a thing that we should organize, or the system should be put in place as a housing for family models, a family model that can work. So my son or any other child can live separately, but within the family home, if you know what I mean. So at the moment, this is what I've been planning to do, and I have put the plan in motion to my local authority. Although I have to say, and yes, I'm going to say this, even if they are listening, they're not very forthcoming. So a family model could be potentially put in place in, I don't know if any of your listeners know much about transforming care, which is a transformation of what the care is being. Because of myself and so many other parents campaigning about the system that doesn't work for our children, putting them in those institutions, and letting our children be abused. So they changed. There's this program from the government called Transforming Care. It was put together by charities, MenCap and the Challenging Behavior Foundation, and parents alike. To change the system, to change how we look at helping families and people with health issues or mental health issues, or or even disabilities. And so, if any parent out there is having, so any parent, you're listening, you're watching, and you're going through this, as hard as it is to speak out, please do. Fight for what is right, because you're worth it, and your child is worth it. If you're going through the moments where if you're going through paperwork to get social services to help you, and they give you excuses, keep fighting. Don't take no for an answer. Get to a day where I did. Do this. My youngest son was 2 years old, and I grabbed Stephen and I went to my local authority, and I didn't have an appointment, and I sat there the whole day, even if he was misbehaving, because I felt that I'm not leaving. Today I'm purposely strong, and I'm not taking no for an answer. You are going to do this, so do it. Don't take no for an answer. You deserve it. Even if they tell you're a good parent, don't take no. Just say, yes, thank you very much. I know I'm a good parent. I don't need you to tell me I'm a good parent. I'm a brilliant parent. I'm a fantastic parent. Now, are you a good social worker?
Yeah. I'd like to just finish off by saying that, I'd like to, first of all, just commend you on your bravery in general. Like we touched on a lot of different topics and a lot of different things that are actually real and actually affect you in the day-to-day. So, I hope there is somebody out there that, I'm sure there will be people that resonate with that story. And from my perspective, that's why I kind of sat and allowed you to kind of speak freely, because like you said, it's about the awareness. It's about the awareness of these stories, and also for you to be able to actually tell it the way you want it to be told, as opposed to other people maybe trying to take a headline or try and take something in the media so that they can generate a story about it, when they're maybe not going to give the full truth, and the full behind the scenes. So that's why ultimately I thought it was important we sit down and get the opportunity for you to speak and
I thought I could not pass on that when he contacted me, because I thought was imperative that we as a society be more kinder to one another, and speak for those who don't have a voice, and for us, for me especially, to tell my son's story, that is somebody else's story as well, and somebody else that don't maybe necessarily have the ability to go somewhere and speak out, because obviously we are all different people. and sometimes we are scared of speaking out, especially when I mentioned earlier gagging orders, and so which is now, gagging orders like now a fashionable thing to do. Parents speak out, then we're taking an order against you, you're not going to speak out against me.
Silence.
Well, guess what? Yes. Well, guess what I said to them? You go ahead and you take a gagging order. I will speak out, and then let's see what happens, because I will go all the way, and somebody will the police will arrest me, put me in a cell. How will you look after that? And I would do it. I would gladly be arrested for that, because it's important. And so I'm not sure if it's courage, really, as you mentioned. I don't think it is. I think it's a desire to do better by my children. As I said, I have another young son who is on the autism spectrum. He is more able than Stephen, but I live in fear every day that something could happen to him if he does anything out of the ordinary, and so I feel strongly that every single parent should be prepared for what could happen if your child becomes challenging, for one of the better words. I do it freely. I do it as a volunteer. So anybody needs help with advocating for your child or for yourself, call me, message me, and I'll be there.
Amazing. Well, you are a very special individual. And,
bless you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for spending the time. And I just really hope that this can resonate and help somebody out there that has gone through some of these problems and can see a little bit of a way in the future that maybe they can avoid some of these problems.
Yes.
And more importantly, if they do see others dealing with them, maybe help and be able to lend a helping hand. So with that being said, Leo, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, and good night.
And
Thank
good
you
night
so
to
much.
everyone. I'll see you guys on the next episode of Minds Emotions. Peace and love.